Welcome to the Open Talent Report, the award-winning podcast where we dive deep into the emerging trends in global employment, the future of work, the talent crisis, the demographic deficit, and the new world of work with our expert host, Connor Heaney. Connor is the managing director at CXC EMEA, a company that takes the hassle out of finding, compliantly engaging, and paying contractors anywhere in the world. In this podcast, Connor brings you captivating conversations with top CEOs, visionary founders, and industry experts. Together, they shed light on all things open talent and the evolving nature of work itself. So grab your headphones and join us on this exhilarating journey.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar on building a business case for direct sourcing. I'm delighted to be joined by our expert panelists, Mike Leacy, Chief Sales Officer and Executive Vice President at Raise, and Derek Sanders, Chief Revenue Officer at Opley. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. It's really great to have you here on today's webinar. And of course, a warm welcome to everyone who's joining us today. Thank you so much for your support and thanks for your interest in what we're going to be discussing today. Mike, just for the benefit of our audience, would you just give a brief background on yourself and Raise?
Sure. Thanks, Connor. Listen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on where you're watching from this morning. At least I'm located out in Toronto, Canada. Connor, I'm obviously really excited to be here with both you and Derek and appreciate the opportunity to speak to the group about all things direct sourcing. My name is Mike Leacy, as Connor mentioned, Chief Sales Officer and Executive Vice President with Raise. Been with the company now for 14 years and over 25 years in the contingent staffing industry. A little bit about our company. We've been recognized as one of the leading and most progressive staffing companies in the world. We've got 67 years of history providing technical staffing, candidate validation and assessment, EOR, AOR, and payroll services. You know, many of our staff have been focused on the direct sourcing space for the last 10 years because we believe it brings incredible value to programs that implement and invest in direct sourcing. And also just worth mentioning, we're the only staffing firm in North America that's PAIR certified and a B Corp. So signaling a commitment to a triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit.
Mike, thanks. It's great to have your expertise on today's webinar. Derek, same to you. What's your background and tell us more about Opley. Thank you.
Thank you, Connor and Michael. Great job. Hello, everybody. I'm Derek Sanders. I'm Chief Revenue Officer here at Opley. I've been in the industry for nearly 2 decades, so not quite as much experience as Michael, but I'm getting there. I had the opportunity to work at some of the best companies in the industry over the past 2+ decades. Opley is a proprietary AI company that, with direct sourcing solutions, that is purpose-built, skill-based, removing the friction between talent and work. We've taken a module approach to really support our clients and to identify the best use of our AI into native platforms. We've been recognized by a third party, Pacific AI, with one of the first unbiased certifications in the industry that focuses on governance, testing, and monitoring ongoing compliance for unbiased certification.
So, and you know what, let me just say, congratulations on that certification, Derek, because I think that's going to be super important.
Thank you. A lot of hard work from the team. So
well done. Well done. And it's great to have you both here, guys, talking about meaningful work and about unbiased AI, really important stuff. So my name is Connor Heaney. I'm the president at CXC Global EMEA. We're a global EOR, AOR, and MSP company, and we've been operating in this sector for 32 years. I've been in the sector now coming up to 20 years. It pains me to say, but absolutely love what we do in this sector and what we do at CXC. So thanks so much for joining us today, folks. Just some brief housekeeping, if we may. We are recording today's show, just to let you know that. We're also aiming at 45 minutes with 15 minutes dedicated to questions and answers. And thanks to everyone, of course, who has submitted their questions in advance. If you have a question during the webinar, please do share it in the chat. And just for a bit of fun, we're coming up to the holiday Christmas time in most Western markets. Please put something fun about you in the chat. That'll be really interesting and most welcome as well. So a warm welcome to you all. With that, we're going to get started. So These are the topics we're going to be covering today: direct sourcing and curation essentials, key tools, technology, strategies for success, case studies, and future trends. And it's really about helping our audience build a business case for direct sourcing. And unless you've been hiding under a rock over the last number of years, direct sourcing has got a lot of attention from the likes of staffing industry and analysts and from ardent partners, and it's really started to become adopted across our sector in the contingent workforce world. And I'm so pleased that we've got experts like both Derek and Mike on the call today to talk about their experience. So with that, Mike, what is direct sourcing?
Well, Connor, thanks for the loaded question to get things off and started. Actually, I think it's a great question to kick it off because I think it will provide a kind of a foundation for the rest of the discussion. There really has been so many different versions of what direct sourcing is, so I'll try and give it a shot. I personally define direct sourcing as when a company leverages its employer brand to attract and curate a private database of contracted candidates that are organized really into talent pools. Um, Direct sourcing provides gains in efficiency, productivity, and economies of scale, really as compared to that kind of that transitional or reactive way of recruiting for contingent roles. Also, when you really think about it, it's just easier to connect employers with candidates who are interested in working for them when they engage in the brand. Um, Another approach was taken by SIA a few years ago, and they kind of defined three versions of direct sourcing, which have really matured over the last 10 years. And, I think using these versions will also help us with parts of this discussion. So, version one, we kind of all agree, kind of the first genesis, which is pre ID'd or payroll services referred candidates that really come in from both either workers or hiring leaders. Version two is now we start to get into what direct sourcing is, the more the proactive piece, curated candidate talent pools, leveraging the employer brand, and using a technology as a platform to be able to do all of those things. And version three, which where some of the companies are today, which is using data to really make those decisions, forecasting, curation of talent pools, using different omni channels to source candidates and attract candidates, and really using kind of advanced practices like AI matching, SMS and texting, et cetera.
It's a really interesting space within our sector, direct sourcing, and I think it's going to become even more important. Typically, because we're having a lot of scarcity of talent, right, for a whole host of reasons, and it's really interesting to me in our sector that organizations want to put the talent first in that talent scarce market, and I think potentially that's one of the key benefits about direct sourcing. Derek, from your seat and from your point of view, what are typically the benefits of direct sourcing? And over the last 10 years, what do you think all the hype is about?
Cost savings. No. There's a lot more to direct sourcing, and the hype around it is a lot around cost savings, which is a very key part of a true direct sourcing program. There will be cost savings due to optimization, exclusivity, all the different things that we do. But I think one of the main things that are the benefits that Michael touched on is really around the proactive approach to recruitment versus reactive, right? Think about a traditional contingent workforce program. Ultimately, it's we post a rec, people identify workers, they submit, right? It's a elongated process versus really choosing that partner, especially from a curation perspective. I think that one of the things that we always advise our clients as a pure technology company is really getting the buy-in from the business. It's input from the business, it's input from the stakeholders, the super users, and those things. And it's really giving enough leash to your curation team to best understand kind of what you're planning for right now and what does that look like in the future, right? Is there a specific talent pool that you need to grow that you're starting to identify opportunities for? Is there a certain segment where you've had success? Is there an internship program? Is there a spike in hiring? All those things can be very proactive in the way that you approach, especially with a great curation partner like Raise. Another thing is creating those talent communities, right? It's about identifying how are we segmenting these workers, right? A business analyst to a marketing hiring manager is very different than a business analyst within technology. And so understand the key nuances of both the job description, the taxonomy of the role, what they're looking for, what skills they're looking to hire for, it's really important to understand ultimately how those things tie together and have a future plan to, when you have those needs arise, those people are already engaged, right? You're doing a drip campaign, you're reaching out to them, keeping them advised on what's available. And I think around with the cost savings is a big portion of a true direct sourcing program. And those comes with exclusivity of roles, and having that chosen partner is very, very important. But I think that really the deeper layer of direct sourcing is really around the flexibility to increase demand when needed and pull that back. Scalability, right? This is across organizations. So it's really the buy-in of the organization to allow the curation partner and technology partners to get in there and to support those hiring managers. And then the omni-channel approach, right? There's so many different ways that people are being engaged. So having your curation team, your career site, all those different things factor into a successful direct sourcing program.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting perspective, Derek. Mike, what's your take on this?
Well, you know what? I'll try not to repeat a lot what Derek had to say because I think he nailed everything. I will just say this, that everything that we do as a curator is really underpinned by the technology, and technology like Opley really allows us to scale these types of programs. But I see really 4 key benefits when it comes to direct sourcing. One, again, better access to quality talent. Derek touched on it, this multi-channel approach, accessing silver medalists, ATS retirees, and really that accessing untouched talent that's already aligned with the brand. Number 2, faster access to talent. As you said, prioritize the talent community. It truly is an asset for its client, leverages the AI to really reduce that time to submit and increase those fill ratios. Next is better candidate and hiring manager experience. I think this is the number 1 reason what direct sourcing should be all about. It's about providing a better mousetrap, if you will. The experience typically with most programs is hiring managers don't really enjoy the process, and certainly candidates don't. It's like a big black hole. So if we can give them a better way to engage directly with clients, I think this is what direct sourcing is about. And then lastly, it's about reducing costs across the program. We typically see somewhere between 5 to 10% cost reductions across most enterprise programs as we scale up. So to sum it up, kind of better, faster, and certainly more cost effective.
Yeah. The benefits of it, I think, are clear, gents, and I really appreciate you both taking the time to outline that. I spent a lot of time in both the United States and Europe, where I'm based, and it strikes me that there's sometimes confusion in the market around some of the terminology around direct sourcing. You've got curation, tech platforms, direct sourcing, talent pools, talent communities. The list goes on. I suppose my question is just for the benefit of our audience, and I see that some of our audience are based in North America, but also some of our audience today are based across Europe, UK, Netherlands, and Germany, and some other places. But Mike, what is curation? Could you just explain that for the benefit of our audience?
You know, Connor, you're giving me all the loaded questions up front here. So first it's direct sourcing. Now I got to do curation. So I'll try and give you what I think is my definition. But let me first by say, I was at an SIA conference a few years back, and one of the keynote speakers was on stage, and they made this following comment: curation and recruiting are pretty much the same thing. And I was kind of sitting back going, I don't think so. I might agree that there may be a few similarities, but I think they're actually quite different. So my definition of curation, it's really the process of selecting and organizing potential candidates proactively in a client-specific talent pool. When we draw candidates into that talent community, we nurture them through talent curation. When I look at recruitment, recruitment's really the process of sourcing, evaluating, interviewing, and hiring candidates really often after the hiring need is presented. So really one's proactive curation and the other is reactive recruitment. With direct sourcing, curators do not seed their own staffing company's ATS database. And it's not for their benefit, but they're building an asset for the client. And I think that's really important for contingent program leaders to know, that a good curator is focused on them and them only. Number 2, with direct curators, curators work exclusively for the direct sourcing client. They're not working for other clients' requirements at the same time. That's typically what a staffing recruiter will do. They'll look at all the different roles that come in and work on the easiest or closest to money. Number three, with direct sourcing, curators regularly connect with content that keeps candidates interested and informed of what's really going on with the client. Essentially, really keeping candidates warm and ready to go when a role is released. And all of that, as I keep mentioning, it requires great technology like Oply to make it easy to be able to connect and engage with those candidates.
It, I think what you've outlined there, Mike, really speaks to the talent experience and having a first class talent experience as part of that curation service within a direct sourcing program. And I agree. I think it's a really big differentiator. And I often think of something that Doug Levy, the chief executive officer at Beeline, says, and he's talking about this in the procurement context and in the context of vendor management solutions and platforms. But his phrase that resonates with me is, it's about people, not pencils, right? And I think that experience is so critical. And just by way of example, right, I'm on some staffing companies and recruitment companies databases from like 2008, right, where I think I got my project management qualification, right? I'm not a project manager anymore, but I'm still getting spammed with roles how many years, 16 years later, right? Saying, do you want to be a project manager? And I think, like, really, if I think about having a world-class experience, almost direct sourcing and curation is a no-brainer. Is that fair to say, Jens?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think it's about identifying the opportunities that they're qualified for, right? And it's about understanding, right, the goal of the curation partner, and I don't want to speak for Mike here, but is to really understand that client, really adopt the brand of that client, right? What's the soft skills? What differentiators for working there? It's about capturing those key things that makes it different than a traditional just staff firm. And staffing firms serve a great purpose, but really that curation partner is so important because they're using the brand voice of that organization. The other thing that I always think about is, like, what do you want the candidate experience to be, right? If they see a ton of jobs, like you had that experience, I get those experiences too, right? You'd be great for a sales intern. I'm like, I would be. Yeah, you're right. But not really that part of my life right now, right? So, but that candidate experience, which is really kind of, it's allowing curation team as well as a hiring manager to look and see what the nearest relevancy score, but also for candidates. You don't want to surface jobs that they're not qualified for. Yes, you have a career page and those things, but proactive reaching out, which is part of direct sourcing, you want to make sure that you feel like you're being seen, that you are being recognized for your success and your skills that you develop over years of experience. And ultimately, how are you, being reached out to for those qualified roles is so important.
I agree. I agree. And Mike, I just want to come on to something that I think is really important when it comes to direct sourcing and getting direct sourcing really right. And that relates to demand planning or resource demand planning or strategic workforce planning. From your perspective, Mike, how important is it to include that when you're building the business case, but also when you're operationalizing direct sourcing?
It's a good question. The way I would put it is this. I think it's absolutely paramount to understand what those future needs for talent pools and development readiness looks like. To me, there really is a science to building talent pools because they're built from data, especially historical data. The data will inform you on which talent pools to build, when to nurture the candidates, and really ensure that you've got enough candidates that are available in that talent pool to actually be able to put on contract. To be honest, though, that most companies have a really difficult time forecasting kind of future hiring needs. So the way to approach that, and the way that we get started, at least, is by using historical data, kind of from the VMS, and really leveraging then the technology like Oply to help us determine where to start, what the future hiring needs may look like. It's really, I kind of liken it as a flywheel. The more proactive that we can be, the better the talent community performs, and ultimately the better the cost savings potential are for the client, because every hire from that talent community drives immediate cost savings. So that's kind of what I'd have to say. It's difficult. It's not easy. Companies have a tough time with it, but there is data at least to get us started.
Derek, what's your take on this?
I think it's about the identification of the gaps that ultimately that they're looking to solve for, right? When they're choosing a new provider, like a curation partner or technology, right? It's about they want to accomplish certain things, right? Do you want to have one record of truth? Do you want to quantify skills better? Do you want to have a higher fill ratio, right? Right. Those are some of the key things that ultimately go into the workforce planning, right? These are all things, especially when you're choosing a new provider, building that business case, which is there is going to be some change management there, right? And the name of it is change, right? Something's different about the approach that they're taking now. And so, being that proactive, looking at different talent pools, looking at optimizing some of those skill matrices and the things that ultimately come in together, which is what does success look like for our organization and quantifying that, I think will help that proactive approach to the workforce planning. But I don't think very few companies do it well. And I think that's the goal for most organizations when they're looking to bring in direct sourcing is to help better forecast for that next year.
I think they're really crucial points to consider there, Jen. So, Derek, staying with you, if we may, does direct sourcing work for every type of client and every type of job?
I think it's pretty broad. I love the question because I think it's a good conversation, right? And I think it goes back to the goals of the organization, what they're looking to solve for. Are there a number of repeatable positions, right, that you're looking to fill that that you're going to have these things where is there a new geography? This is not a chance to say, what do we have in this location? It's really a commitment to the process and it's a commitment to identification of skills. The other thing is around kind of, you know, what does a high volume look like? Because the goal is to have as many recruiters that have those fill ratios, right? It works great within call centers. It works great within more technical roles. But I do see success even in light industrial and clinical roles because as long as the skills are there, you can identify the profile of success, right? That's usually what we talk about, especially with uh, clients that have super users that tend to hire a contingent workforce in certain job categories and really getting the input and saying, great, who are the people that have been successful over the last 6 months? Can we pull their information? Can we see some of the success that will help affect the recruitment strategy that the curation partner will ultimately tie into? And then really from a technology perspective, it's hooking into the native systems to understand those profiles, understand the skill matrices. So I think it's less about will it work for every single position or every single client. It's really about the commitment. Are you willing to commit to a process? Because we've all seen successful programs and we've seen unsuccessful programs. The ones that do have that commitment, have the backbone, and have the backing of the entire organization of the goals that they're looking to accomplish.
Thanks, Derek. Mike, what's your perspective on that?
Well, I think most companies that have a large contingent program should be thinking about direct sourcing. I do think it works best when you do have a recognizable brand, but brand doesn't always need to be recognizable either because you can overcome with some of that stuff with really strong marketing and social media programs that we as the curator can really leverage to attract those candidates. I do really think, though, that a company needs to be fully committed in implementing best practices. Um, as Tarek mentioned, we've all been involved in really good programs and poor programs. And the poor programs generally we've taken on, but not with the commitment from the client to really provide all the things that we need necessary. So again, being able to forecast, leveraging the brand, using and leveraging kind of candidates out of the ATS, putting a priority window. Those are all the things that we need in order to ensure, because when we're given that, we know we can scale these programs. Um, Derek touched on kind of highly repeatable roles or higher volume roles, but it also can be used for very scarce resources as well. Because again, this is all about building proactive talent pools. And so, I've got a couple examples that I've used where we've got these large clients, but they have specific, and I don't want to call them purple squirrels, but they are roles that come up consistently and they are absolutely needed. by the hiring leaders. So they're very important. So things like Snowflake, which is kind of a data management software, having that expertise in-house and when needed doesn't happen all the time. It's certainly not highly repeatable or volume-based, but knowing that they need these, then we've gone out and, we've reached out to the candidates and built those talent pools for either specific regions that the client needed. Primavera is another one, which is more of a project management tool. Again, there's clients that we have in the oil and gas space that uses this technology. And so we've been able to, especially in geographic areas where that tool is needed, we've been able to proactively do that. And it really builds kind of that brand awareness of what direct sourcing could bring. And again, it's getting back to the hiring leaders and building that real hiring leader experience for them.
Thanks, Mike and Derek. And I take so much from what you've just said there. And if our audience are thinking about building a business case, there's so many great things that you both said there. Getting the job families right, the resource demand planning, understanding the data, if it sits in a VMS or an ATS. Really, really great advice there, Derek and Mike. So, Mike, you mentioned earlier about the evolution of direct sourcing, and I think we're on our third iteration of that, which to me suggests a level of innovation. And I suspect that we'll probably be on direct sourcing 4.0
Yeah.
next year, gents. But Derek, from your perspective, what innovations are we seeing from companies like yours, Opley? And also, Mike, what are we seeing in terms of innovation from curators like Raise? Over to you, Derek.
Yeah, I think our main mission is removing that friction between talent and work. And people have a lot more access. We talked about, Connor, you brought this up in your intro, which is, there's a lot of different ways to identify talent now these days, right? They have way more access to their personal data. They have way more how they're present, how they're being shown in platforms. But part of that too is, how do you assess, right? We talk about this a lot, which is companies are very bad at writing robust JDs, or job descriptions, right? I think that on the inverse side, people are terrible at writing resumes, right? The ChatGPT of the worlds are, can you really do these things that you put on your resume? Are there certain certifications that we're seeing? So really what we've done is try to take a more modular approach, which is understanding each segment of what we're doing, right? Is it really for the hiring manager to identify the key skills? Is it on the candidate side, which is they can control their own data, update their information as they have new certifications or new updates or new roles, right? They have more autonomy on the way that they're seen by job interviewers. And then ultimately, what does that career page look like? What do they want? Messaging, soft skills, company culture. And we want to capture all those things, right? There's so many different ways to identify talent. Think about a direct sourcing program. There could be an MSP involved. There could be a VMS involved. There could be an Opley or a direct sourcing tech. Obviously, the curator plays an important role. Is there a skills assessment? There's so many things that go into, and not every one size doesn't fit all. But what I'm seeing from an innovation perspective is kind of in the margins, away from, hey, we have a role to fill. We have candidates. We want to match those candidates, submit, identify the best person, and fill that role. I think it's a little bit more about taking a step back and looking at the foundational layer of recruitment and curation, right? What does my JD look like? We released in 2024, a suite of services called Skills Intelligence. It's really understanding the taxonomy of the role. What best practices are other organizations using? How do I affect my JD? What do I want to be seeing? A lot of jobs have not been refreshed from a JD perspective since 2020, 2021, right? And we're a very different world. We're a very different country. You are different as a person 4 years later. It's not really reflective of the skills and the things that you're looking for from 4 years ago. So can you influx some of the key things that market trends that are affecting the industry as well? And then I think it's really more about technology from a standpoint of connectivity, right? How are you updating your information? How are you making sure your systems working together? Where a hiring manager, if they have a difficult time logging into any of their systems, they throw their hands up and this doesn't work, right? So integrations, focusing on API driven and leveraging some artificial intelligence in a responsible way really helps drive some of those innovations that we're seeing in the marketplace.
Yeah, I love that, Derek. And Derek, I've known you both some time. Mike, when I first met you and the team at Raise, I was immediately struck by your approach to innovation, your great personalities across your business that reflects that. But Mike, from your perspective as one of the leading curators that are out there, what innovations are you guys seeing and promoting?
Well, the reality when I got in this business, and we'll call it, as early 20, call it 20 years ago, we used to, pull resumes out of file rooms and all of that type of stuff. There was hardly any automation, but I've seen over the last 3 to 5 years, the technology is just absolutely breaking through, and to actually keep up to date with it is so hard. So, obviously technology in the staffing world is evolving quickly. So innovation is absolutely necessary, especially from us as curators. So, our company, it's this unusual combination of we're a traditional technical recruiting firm, but we're kind of run by techie nerds that's really invested heavily in creating our own dedicated technology product team. I call our CEO Tim the kind of the nutty professor, and actually just recently heard him called the Willy Wonka of the staffing industry. But it's his passion for technology has led to a lot of innovation throughout our overall company. We have an in-house team that really works to develop, innovate, and integrate digital tools into our processes, so we can really scale and improve and deliver efficiencies to our client. And then obviously we use technology partners like Opley. We've also developed our own in-house leading technologies throughout all of our curation and EOR services to really create those efficiencies and bring cost savings to our clients. And I'll give you an example of one of those. We all know there's this big shift happening from how we evaluate candidates and review candidates based on their resumes to more of skill-based hiring, especially in those highly technical roles like cyber, cloud, and AI experts. Heck, the reality is many of the hiring leaders just don't even have the expertise or experience to be able to evaluate those skill sets. So for that, we've kind of built now a proprietary ID candidate skills testing platform. We call it the Skills Project. And really, it's bringing AI skills authentication technology and really building this innovation to improve kind of candidate quality. It really helps mitigate fraud. It proctors social media sites of the candidate itself. It pings IP addresses. We live in this remote world, and we expect people where they're supposed to be actually working from, and it pings those addresses to make sure they are where they are. They are who they say they are. And so really it brings all of this together through an assessment tool to really reduce that fraud overall, but really provide a better quality candidate. And so we use this technology as we build out our talent pools to vet candidates proactively. So we've got a pre-selected, pre-vetted group of candidates, especially in that technology space.
I'm loving this innovation, guys. It's really amazing to see what we're doing in this sector. I've been directly in direct sourcing or adjacent to it for over 10 years now, and I've seen many iterations of direct sourcing, and we've mentioned that already. And I've also seen some iterations of different iterations of actually building a business case. Mike, staying with you. What are the key components of building a business case for a successful direct sourcing program?
Yeah, it's again, love the question, Connor. And I believe that the business case is probably one of the most important steps in the overall process and should never be overlooked. Kind of direct sourcing relies heavily on that strategic support from at the executive level, but absolutely needs support from all of its stakeholders throughout the organization. Stakeholders we say are like HR, talent acquisition, IT, marketing, procurement, etc. To help companies get started, we've actually tried to simplify the business case process. We've actually developed kind of a step-by-step planning guide that allows contingent leaders to identify kind of everything you could think of when you need to build that business case. So things like why? Why do you want to actually do direct sourcing? What are the goals and what's the alignment with the business? What are the challenges and what are the kind of the opportunities that direct sourcing could provide? How do you define success? You know, Again, who are those key stakeholders that you're going to need support from to be able to do all the things that direct sourcing needs? And then really, what are the financial impacts to once you implement direct sourcing into your program? So, I suggest to many of our clients, don't overthink the process. Direct sourcing can be as simple as just another channel to fill your contingent roles. There does not have to be massive disruption to the existing programs. I've always said, like, direct sourcing, it's not a sprint, it's a journey. And for most programs, so just get started, because actually, as you get started, you will see value from just moving forward. Um, we recently got the chance to sit down with a contingent leader from a global financial service firm, to really help them think through their business case, because they had and have been looking at direct sourcing for quite some time. They've been doing absolutely all the right things, meeting with all the curation organizations, meeting with all the technology companies and EOR to really say what is best, who are those players, etc. And so we've helped them develop the business case, which now they're going to take to their executives to go and get that executive approval to move forward with direct sourcing. You know, in our experience, change management, though, is probably one of the most important factors in a successful program. It's kind of critical. It's a critical success factor when creating that strong partnership, because you need a strong communication plan between all stakeholders in order to get that program launched. All stakeholders have to be identified right up front. There has to be clear expectations. So all of that has to be set up early. And I'll give you another example. Through change management, it was a kind of a key area or a key factor when we successfully launched with one of our oil and gas clients. From day one, we worked with the program leaders to kind of socialize direct sourcing solution across the entire organization. But we worked in tandem with their MSP as well as the workforce planning office. We provided specific educational documentation. We worked with marketing. We did all the touch points to kind of educate key stakeholders and the hiring leaders about the benefits of what direct sourcing meant. And, we socialized candidates from within the talent community. We enabled hiring managers to prioritize those candidates. And one of the key things that we did, what I thought, it was just a simple change, but when you look at these MSP programs, they're non-branded, okay? They don't want you to know who the resume is being submitted from. What we did is, because this is the client's asset, we actually branded it with the client's brand itself. And that was one of the key. It was almost subliminal, getting the hiring manager to know that the resume was associated with direct sourcing, and it really contributed to allowing us better adoption and more scaling, and became really successful across the enterprise.
I love the really excellent practical advice you've provided there, Mike, and even just your starting point, which is often overlooked. Why? Why? Why do we want to do this? Right?
Yeah.
Why the hell are we doing this? And I think it's such a great question to start with. Start with why, and all those other pieces that you mentioned are of critical importance, of course. But I think that's an amazing way to start when you come to build that business case. So, Derek, anything to add to what Mike said there?
Yeah, I think, having worked, especially, Connor, we've talked about this before. Connor and I used to compete against each other all the time. And EOR is a little bit different of a game than direct sourcing. Obviously, an important part, the engagement companies really make the program, how does it look, how does it feel, what does onboarding look like, benefits, all the rest of it. But typically we've been selling to procurement, right? For large MSP programs, it's run by procurement. And while I love all my procurement friends that are out there on this webinar, I think it's also about kind of bringing in talent acquisition and HR. I think that for a long time, TA and HR have kind of said, that's contingent workforce, take a step back, right? But when you're leveraging the brand, to Michael's point about what they're leveraging, the brand, the voice, the soft skills, involving some of those things, the hiring managers, I think it's really important to involve TA, because they're effectively showing what they want to be seen in the marketplace, what the recruitment strategy, what technologies, and now hopefully with some insight and some tangible data that you can bring to the table and say, this is what we have from a skill perspective. This is what we're bringing to the table. It would affect also full-time hiring effectively down the road too. And so bringing in HR, bringing in TA into a direct sourcing program, I think is so important, because they're ultimately responsible for what the culture and some of those things are in the organization, and it brings TA and HR to have a seat at the table into the contingent labor conversation as well.
Great points, Derek. And I agree with them. And as we look towards the stakeholder community and who you need to involve in building that business case, there's often objections. And unfortunately, I know this to my cost because some years ago, we were building a direct sourcing campaign for a large aviation company, and we'd put a lot of work into it from a technology, curation, compliance.
I know that one.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
know that one.
Yeah, I think you know it, that one. Exactly. But yeah. So anyway, we were just about to go live, right? And we put all efforts into the program from the client side, from every conceivable partner and everyone involved in the deal. And just as we were about to turn on the branded talent community, legal came out of nowhere. Now, legal should never come out of nowhere. If you're doing a business case, right, and that's your identification piece, right, which we didn't, right? Full disclosure, we didn't at the time. A good lesson learned. But what it did illustrate to me, gents and to our audience, was the importance of overcoming those objections, but also identifying those stakeholders. So, Mike, from your perspective, what are the key objections from stakeholders that crop up the most?
Reality is there's always going to be objections, but I think the ability to, first of all, understand who those stakeholders are, understand what their priority and concerns are, and really just be able to have those conversations to address those. That's really how you kind of move this ball forward, because the last thing you want, and I've been there too, where all of a sudden one of those stakeholders at the 11th hour comes out and says, I'm not on board with this, and everything gets shelved. That's the last thing you want. So for me, like, an effective direct sourcing program really does require close collaboration, transparency, and buy-in from all those stakeholders. And we found let me say this. There's really two types of clients we work with. One that we already have a pre-established relationship with, and others that we come in from the cold. And so we have found, like, this significant difference that when we already have that pre-established relationship, um, there's a level of trust that's been built over time, which I think is actually very foundational when you start to ask for things like the client's brand, like being able to post contract roles on their website, accessing candidates out of their ATS like silver medalists and retirees. So, when you don't have that, sometimes it's going to take a little bit longer to implement all of those direct sourcing best practices. So it's about building credibility. And remember, I've always said this, and I said this earlier, it's a journey, it's not a sprint. So, when you talk about objections, we receive lots of them. One could be from hiring managers. They can be resistant because they love, they have established relationships with current suppliers. They love the people that they currently work and buy from. So they don't want that to go away. Sometimes the MSP puts in things or roadblocks because, quite frankly, they just weren't involved from day one with the process, and they're just unsure of what the impact is going to be to their program overall. I think use of brand is absolutely one that we always see some form of objection on. We've got a very large global power and energy company, and the brand is owned by Talent Acquisition, and they are very fearful of diluting that brand with contingent workers. But the reality is, in that program alone, somewhere between 35 and 45% of the headcount is contingent. It's already happening, so why not leverage it and to build a better experience for them? And then there's also, from legal perspective, this idea that co-employment increases because of direct sourcing. And so those are the things that we've seen in the past. We've always kind of had some recommendations. One is facilitate focus group sessions to educate hiring managers on what those benefits are. Listen, we're not saying you can't do business, but there's a different way. And ultimately, we are a partner. We're building an asset, and it's really the clients, candidates that they want to or should be working and prioritizing. So you can overcome that with just education. I think overall, reviewing the efficiency and the financial impacts of direct sourcing. When everyone's aligned and understanding what the total goals are, what procurement's trying to do by bringing in direct sourcing, I think you get alignment from there. Again, understanding all the stakeholders and helping them, asking them to help promote direct sourcing. Um, we've seen where you start small in one area and you start to get success and use that kind of peer-to-peer references to kind of build out and go across the enterprise. And then lastly, with the MSP is just really working with them. We're not a threat. We're actually here to partner with them because at the end of the day, a successful direct sourcing can really scale and add more volume into their program and make it a win-win for all of us, not only the curation and technology partners, the MSP partner, the candidates, the hiring managers, and ultimately the client.
Beautifully put, Mike. Thank you. Derek, anything to add in this one?
Yeah, I think it's really important, especially from our perspective from a technology, is really understanding the tech stack, right? And understanding kind of what different programs they want to leverage, right? Is there a VMS? Is there an ATS? And for the acronym alphabet soup, right? It's the applicant tracking system. How do you ultimately, like, are you using the full-time numbers? Are you using those silver medalists, right? Understanding where can we hook into those things, right? Because we want to assess those candidates, bring them into the fold for the curation partner to identify, screen, and engage. How deep do you want the integration to be? I know a lot of companies want to do like pilot programs and those things. Can we do this as a standalone? Or do we need to go full down the integration path? And so it's really kind of when you're talking about the key objections, it's really more about like how bought into are you for direct sourcing, like what's your buy-in there, because allowing the curation partners to be set up for success, we have to hook into our native environments. Whatever they're leveraging is totally fine, and we take the modular approach to say we're not trying to increase your tech stack. It's really about integrating into your native environments to pull out the right information, to assess that information, to bring it over. And so when you're thinking about objections, it's really kind of, we walk hand in hand with all of our partners in that scenario to understand what they're looking to accomplish, and then how deep can we get that integration into their native environments.
Thanks, Derek. And I'd like to stay with you if that's okay. So, Derek, when we think about success for a direct sourcing program, what does that look like?
I think we've covered a lot of this. It's really the key stakeholder buy-in, right? It's really about getting that buy-in from the clients, from the key hiring managers, from procurement, from legal, from HR, right? We've talked about that. Technology is a big adoption, right? If hiring managers have to go to multiple different systems or they're not talking to each other, your overarching success is not going to be there. And then I think that the strong relationship, like how do you go to market? I've had the privilege of working with both you and Michael. We have great MSP partners, VMS partners. The cohesiveness when going to market, you don't want the Hatfields and McCoys partnering up together. You want them to ultimately tie in together and say, this is how we're going to, it could be clunky. It could be, there could be discussions in the background, but having that cohesive partnership, that technology affects curation affects engagement, EOR companies, it affects the MSP program, it affects the employer brand. You have to keep those things in consideration. And so I think Michael's going to talk a little bit more about some of the success that we've seen from successful programs, but ultimately it's about all parties taking the ego out a little bit. And me saying that, I know is kind of a laughable thing, but it's about taking the ego out and really making sure that all these things come together in a cohesive, because the ultimate goal is a successful direct sourcing program.
I think that cohesiveness piece is so important, Derek. Mike, what does success look like from your perspective?
Well, I'll try to stay away from everything Derek said because obviously he was spot on with a lot of that. But to me, direct sourcing, success in direct sourcing starts with buy-in from the top as well as the stakeholders who are impacted. But to me, once direct sourcing is operational, it actually should be seamless, like any other program, and that's what is, I think, sometimes people, again, overthinking this process, but once it's up and running, it kind of just starts to go on its own. So I think that's part of that success. I also think that the only difference is that direct sourcing leverages all of those best practices, the priority windows, use of brand, accessing the ATS from the candidates, etc. That's the only real difference, but that's because we're trying to build that talent community. We're trying to build that asset for the client. Kind of best practices, really, when all of that comes into play, you should be able to scale this program. You know, within the first few years, you should be able to go from 25% up to about 50% of all the hires coming out of the direct sourcing team. And ultimately, and I said this earlier, I think the ultimate in success is about having an incredible candidate and hiring leader experience. When all of that is humming well, that's when everyone's engaged. Everyone wants to continue to use candidates that come out of that talent community. So I just think all of those things considered is about success. And I'll say one last thing, and I think Derek touched on it earlier, which is um, it's this overused term called total talent. And we've all heard of it. It's kind of this, is it real, is it not? But I've actually started to believe in it, that direct sourcing can really be the bridge between talent acquisition and contingent programs. They tend to work in very much siloed. But when you start to leverage the brand and you have these engaged talent pools of people who want to come and work for you that are already built, why wouldn't you engage the candidates first, bring them and attract them to the client, use the brand to do that, but then take advantage of the people or the talent that's already in the talent pools and engage with them. Let them decide, do I want to be an employee? Do I want to be on contract? Or let them start on contract and convert them over to full time. It provides so much flexibility that I think it gives that obviously ability to really scale what I think is potentially future talent, total talent.
Yeah, and staying on the theme of the future, Derek, how do you see the appetite and the model for direct sourcing changing?
Yeah, I think that a lot of companies have tried direct sourcing, right? We all know that we see the RFPs, we see all the things that come up. So I think Gen 2, Gen 3 programs are going to look very different, right? One of the ways I think that direct sourcing has traditionally been all EOR or W2 in the US, PAYE in the UK, which is our great workers, right? You have a lot more control around those things. But I do think that the rise of independent contractors with companies like CXC that are ultimately providing the back office solutions for independent contractors and statement of work workers, well, you're missing out on highly qualified workers. These are the people that have set up their own business because they're experts in their field. And I think that if you're a smart, educated buyer, yes, there's risk with independent contractors, but that's why you have a provider like CXC, where ultimately it ties them together, it mitigates that risk, and they take on that risk themselves. The next part I think is really around the question of AI. As a proprietary AI company, I think that I'm coming from a biased place. But what I would say is I have not seen one RFP or one QPR where they're not asking, what's your approach to AI? What's your approach to those things where, questionnaires are being handled, like data security, candidate privacy, all those things factor into how are you leveraging AI? And I think that that's a question that you have to answer for your clients is what's your approach? I think that our approach has been really about two things, right? Repeatability and scalability, right? You want the outcomes to be consistent and you want to be able to scale on many different roles, right? And so having the skill-based approach that we've taken, I think allows for that repeatability and scalability there. And then one other thing I just want to highlight is when you want to stay competitive, right? And so you have to look forward to the future, which is assessments. I think that what Michael brought up with his team, what they're doing, how do we make sure that people are who they say they are and qualifying those workers? There's a lot of great tech out there. There's a lot of great companies like Raise and CXC that support that evaluation for workers.
Yeah. Mike, what's your read on this? Thanks, Derek.
Well, I think we're in our infancy still of direct sourcing. The reality is we've been talking about it, especially over the last 5 years, but as long as 10. But I do want to give a shout out. Ardent Partners actually just shared a recent report on direct sourcing, and it was great. And I think it was very succinct, and I think you should all take a look at it. But it really only showed that 11% of companies have truly implemented an end-to-end direct sourcing program. But there's another 23% who have started to implement many pieces of what direct sourcing is. So I think you've already seen right there's like 34% of the companies have got some form of direct sourcing happening. But another statistic that I've read is that more than half, 52% of contingent workforce leaders do expect to increase their future direct sourcing developments over the next 3 years. So the idea that direct sourcing is just a fad, no, it's real, it's working. And certainly that 11% is seeing massive value from implementing direct sourcing. So I think any company that uses contingent workers should want to explore direct sourcing. It really does allows companies to make and nurture connections directly with workers who have really expressed an interest of just wanting to work with that company. And so at the end of the day, there's a path for companies to offer a candidate who's interested in working a way to just state their interest. Hey, I love and want to work with you. Here's who I am. Here's what my skill sets are. And to be able to either engage with them or find a way to bring them into the company, whether it's on contract or on as a full-time employee. I really believe that direct sourcing has emerged as really one of the most promising workforce innovations over the last decade.
I think it's difficult to disagree with that, Mike, and I actually wholeheartedly agree with you. I think it's an amazing innovation. Mike, Derek, we just want to touch briefly. You guys have worked on a lot of programs together with your respective companies. Just in the interest of time, could you just cover some of how you went about building the business case for that particular client?
Yeah. Why don't I get started? And Derek, by all means, if you want to pipe in, please do so.
Yeah.
We've got one shared, I'll give you one shared case study for both Raise and Opley, one of our clients. It was about a year ago. One of Raise's existing clients went to market for a direct sourcing solution. They're a global technology enabled services company to the legal industry. They have typically across all the categories, corporate roles like IT, finance, admin, et cetera. But they also run very large contact centers for legal support. So they need to quickly scale up and scale down for projects. So they felt direct sourcing was really a good fit for their business. And from my perspective, I think it was a best in class approach for them in how they went to market to evaluate whether it's curators, technology from my perspective. And so, first of all, they started the evaluation internally and they approached all of the various stakeholders like IT, marketing, HR, et cetera, and brought them all along and included the company executives. And they did this to help build that business case process. They established why direct sourcing, what approach to use, and what were the outcomes that they wanted to accomplish. They also, and I thought this was brilliant, but they really did a lot of digging into their existing program. They looked at the data. They provided so much information about the geographies, what roles they brought in, how many roles they brought in, et cetera. And what it did is it truly allowed those that were going to be bidding, they provided the information and historical information so that we could really intelligently bid and do a really good job at proposing a solution. Um, they also did their own research before they went out to market. They went and they understood who those curators were, who were the technology partners out there. And so they established a short list of curators and a short list of tech firms. Um, they also made the decision, which was quite unique because we don't see this very often, where they actually went to the curation. They decided, let's bring the curators in first because they felt it was really important to bring in the right curator who's going to understand their business and who could represent their brand from a market perspective. And they also wanted to ensure that that curator could also provide EOR, AOR services because they felt that the candidate journey was really important. They wanted to make sure that whoever they brought in, who sourced and curated the candidates, would also do the onboarding and the offboarding. And so after all of that, Raise was chosen for their curation EOR services. Next, they moved on to technology. And what they did, which I thought was quite brilliant, is they relied on the curator because ultimately we're the ones who have to use the technology in order to be able to scale up and provide that success. And understanding what was really important to them so that we could then apply that towards the technology partners. So they asked us to assist them in that process. And one of the things that we did is we actually came up with an evaluation process, both from an interview as well as kind of a checklist as to what was most important and needed to help us actually curate. And so we needed that tool to be able to evaluate apples and apples across all of the various technologies. And so one other thing that was important is they implemented Beeline as their VMS. And so they needed to make sure that technology integrated seamlessly so that we could run a completely very productive, very efficient direct sourcing program. And ultimately, they chose Oply as the technology. And so just giving you some facts, we went live in April of this year. Phase one was really looking at the corporate roles. Today, we built their talent community. We've got over 73,000 candidates today in the talent pool. We've got 14 distinct talent pools that we built for them. And so far since April, we've got a 34% hit ratio coming out of direct sourcing. So we're now showing them what we can do, and we're looking at, okay, how do we scale and look at those repeatable high volume roles like call center? How do we do that? Because there is some massive volume that we could leverage from direct sourcing. So we've already started one. We did a program up in Canada, and then we basically now are looking at some of the big call centers in the US. Just really to touch on a couple of things, some of the important factors I just wanted to note. When the client does all the right things upfront in their evaluation selection process, it really leads to successful outcomes. And that's built on that consultative partnership and deep relationships. And then number two, coming in cold versus that natural relationship evolution, working collaboratively, you've earned the right to be able to do all that work and represent the client's brand out in the marketplace.
Yeah, I love that. Derek, anything to add on this case study?
Yeah, I think Michael hit on it pretty well, but I think the depth of our tech integration, right? They're using our foundational Oply Curate layer. We're integrating into multiple different systems, right? We're hooking into obviously Beeline as our partner from a VMS perspective. We hook into the ATS. We're also, from a CRM perspective, hooked into Salesforce. And so those are really the deep integrations where ultimately everything's talking to each other, everything's working together. We are a platinum partner with Beeline, so our integration is very deep, right? And we do some foundational AI work for Beeline as well. And so I think that the systems talking to each other, the integration with Beeline really has helped raise, and I don't want to speak for them, but I think the success that we're seeing, the outcomes that ultimately are coming out of it is by leveraging all the systems talking to each other. And then they're asking for more, right? They're asking what's next, right? How do we go into the US for additional call centers? What other things can we be bringing to the table? And so I think the case study will continue to grow and grow.
Guys, thanks so much for your time today and your expertise and your advice and your best practices. I think anyone that has been watching today will be immediately struck by how useful the information you provided is. And I'd like to thank you both for that. And I'd also like to thank our audience for tuning in today, because this was a fascinating conversation that gave really great insights to myself hosting it, but also to our listeners as well. We have a ton of questions that we're not going to be able to get through, but the good news is that will lead to a second webinar, and we'd be delighted to invite you both back to discuss some of the questions that have come in. Those questions really have revolved, the majority of them are around employer branding and how important that is, and I think we'll look to that in our second webinar. So with that, I think we've got a call to action where you can find out more about our partners at Raise and Oply and CXC, and please download. Please scan the QR code to download Direct Sourcing Business Case. Derek, Mike, thanks so much for today. Thanks to all our teams who have worked so hard in the background to make this happen, and wishing our audience and you both a very happy holiday season and a very Merry Christmas.
Thank you for listening to the Open Talent Report with Connor Heaney. If you found this podcast informative and engaging, make sure you subscribe, tell your friends, and follow us on all your favorite streaming platforms.